To construct our basic head turn of the face, now that the artwork is mostly arranged on the layers, we do want to set up the eyes so that we can have a cutter assigned to them. Step one, I want to make sure I turn off animate. I don't want to be creating any keyframes yet. I'm trying to get my layers organized and ready to go. So I make sure that animate is not selected but is turned off. Now, the next thing that I need to do is I need to create the artwork that is going to go on the cutters. So if I look at the white of the eye here, now I can quickly find one specific layer and look at that by clicking the solo button. So next to the eyeballs in the layer window, you will see where I can solo a layer, so I can see just that layer. That's easier than trying to turn a bunch of layers on and off as you're working. So if you haven't discovered that feature yet, it can be quite handy. We can sometimes take advantage of utilizing the light box, but in this where it's giving me all kinds of stuff, that's still getting a little bit confusing, so I'm going to just turn it off and look just at that layer. So starting with the front eye, what we need to do is we need to find a mask object that we can use that's going to limit the visibility of the eye. So I want just the eye here as I look at it. So I want to be able to move this around within the eye, and then if I want the perimeter of the eye to be able to cut or trim that. And to do that, what we can do is we can set up a cutter. Now the way that the cutter works is we need to have the area that's going to be the mask, the limiting area for that object. So I'm going to grab my select tool, my tool palette, and select the white of the eye on eye white front layer. And I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to go to my cutter eye front layer. And we're going to then paste in what I copied. Now, if I'm using solo mode, I'm not going to see much of anything. But if I switch to the normal view, we will see that I now made his eye white. This cutter object, it does not matter what color it is. So if this particular object, if I fill it with just a color I'm not using anywhere in my project, like green, so we'll see that it's now green, but it is not going to be visible. All we're going to be using it for is to create a mask.
Paste it into the...
To make sure that we've got these first steps down, because they are fairly critical and important, we have to do them correctly. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to my eye white back layer. Now looking at that, I am selecting the white of the eye because I want to use that particular piece of artwork to be a mask. But I don't want this one to go away because I need to be able to see that white of the eye. So I am going to copy that. And now if I go up and solo the cutter eye back layer, but here's the important part. I have to click in the empty frame. So I'm clicking in that frame, and now when I paste, it pastes my artwork in the identical location that I copied it from. If I only click on the layer and paste, it's not going to put it where it needs to go. So it's important that we follow that very subtle but important distinction. If I go back to the front eye here, select the white of the eye, copy. Now I'm going to solo the cutter eye front layer, click in its drawing frame, paste, it puts that shape in. This is not a mandatory or necessary step, except it helps us to verify that things are working correctly, and that is I am going to fill that shape with this obnoxious green. I will do the same thing for the other eye. That, again, notice I tried to do it and it's telling me no, you can't do that. I have to go to the layer, and now I can fill in that color. So I've now put those shapes, these objects that I will use as a mask. So when I call it cutter, that's because that is the terminology that Harmony uses. If it makes more sense to your brain to call it a mask, because this is going to be a masking layer, so this is the artwork that's going to be a mask, if that makes more sense for you, go nuts and do that instead. Doesn't matter. But Harmony refers to it as a cutter. So when we're creating a mask, we're creating a cutter. So that's why I've chosen to name my layers in this manner. The next thing that I want to do is to then attach a cutter to my eyes. So starting out with my back eye, this layer right here, I am going to attach a cutter to it. Now to do that with that layer active, in the top of the layer palette, if I click the plus up there, the plus next to it shows me the properties for this layer. It shows me my position, my rotation, scale, and skew. So if you've clicked on that and looked at it before, that's also useful when you are doing animation and keyframing. We can add in some easing options with the little arrows to the side there. Click the plus at the top of the layers palette. Down at the bottom is an item called effect. So I'm going to add an effect. The effect I'm going to add is cutter. When I do that, you will see it attaches an effect. Effects always show up in the timeline with a star next to their name. If you are using multiple versions of the same kind of effect, which we are going to be doing here, it's not a bad idea to put names on them. You don't have to leave them just generic cutter. The next thing that we need to do with this layer is this is where we click the plus next to our cutter. And that reveals the matte. The matte is where we're going to be able to define the mask. The cutter, I'm going to repeat with the other eye. I click on eye front layer. This is the actual artwork for the eye. At the top of the layer palette, with eye front selected, I click the plus and I choose effects, cutter. That puts the cutter on that layer, and then we will see the plus on the cutter layer. When I click there, it's giving me an option, drag layer here. The layer that we're going to drag over there is going to be that cutter layer. So I drag that over and it creates a mask. Notice we don't see that ugly green anymore. Repeat that with the back eye, drag it over, and now we can see it's kind of working, except that, let's see, the eye is in front of the eye white, but now we see the white of the eye there. So if I switch over and decide I want to move the eye around, we will see how the eye is having some issues. And the reason being is the cutter by default hides what is the shape of the mask, and we need to invert it. And we can do that by double clicking on the layer to bring up its properties, and we will see the layer property. We have an option to invert it. Now I'm going to change mine, so just rename mine cutter eye front. Oh wait, no, that was my layer name. And now I can do the same thing for the back eye. Oh, I already did bring it over, whoops. I just need to double click on it and invert it. Now with my eye layer active, we will see how it resides and sits inside the eye. The one thing I'm noticing is I think I want to do a little bit of coloring change so that the eye has a little bit more pop. So I can very easily do that if I turn off my mask temporarily. And I'm going to just grab my paint bucket and add a little extra color to my eyeballs just so they have more oomph when they are animating. If I turn back on my mask, we will see how that eye moves within that eye window. So we can very easily start animating our character eyes within an eye shape. To continue the organization process of our layers, now what I'm going to do is start pulling things into logical groups, and if I attach a peg onto those items, then I can just move that peg and it will move the whole group of items. So if I think about it, the facial features, if those are attached to a peg, I can very quickly and easily move the face around on screen. So the facial features that I want to attach would be the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. I'm not going to attach the ears to that because those I will have to move differently and individually separate from the rest of the features of the face. Now the head turn that we're doing here is not going to be a complete head turn. We're kind of going for about maximum of a quarter of a head turn because that's about as far as we can get without having to start redrawing our artwork. So we would need additional views of our artwork to accomplish further movements. So with that, as we're putting these layers together, what works is I am going to be taking from nose or from mouth all the way through the front eyebrow, and I want all of those layers to be grouped into a single peg. And then I may add in additional pegs as needed as well. So to do that, we can add in the peg, add the layers to it, and then move the peg, or I can have one layer selected and just add a peg to it, and now we can see where it started out and is referring to that layer as mouth peg. And I'll call it features because it's the facial features. Now, I don't want the ear, I want the eyebrow, all of the eye stuff through the nose to also be on this peg layer. Now, one thing you will notice is I attach the peg to the mouth first. Then I drag the other layers down so that they're all now attached to this one peg. We will have to set the pivot point for this to get it arranged onto our screen. But the reason that I attached it to the mouth first and drag the other layers down is Harmony always seems to be a little bit more friendly as far as layer ordering when I'm dragging down versus dragging up. So that's why I chose to select the bottommost layer of this grouping, the mouth, and then attach the peg to it, then drag the other layers in so they're all now part of this one peg. Now if I zoom out, I will see that that has given me already a much more manageable structure. Now for this particular peg, we need to look and figure out where is its registration point going to be. I'm going to set it kind of right between the eyes, right at the corner of the brows. So now if I were to take this and move it, we will see how I can now start sliding the face. So we can now slide the face over from a little bit on one side over to the other. So we have some flexibility. Now if I'm going to go further, if I go too far, we'll see that unless that's part of my animation style, I'm probably going to have to start individually shifting layers and groups of layers to work a little bit more effectively with my drawing. Now that I have the features attached onto a peg, what I also want to do is I want to get the rest of the head attached onto a peg as well. So I'm going to click on the bottom layer of what I plan for my peg stack, I will click on the Add a Peg button. And now I double clicked, didn't mean to, I was just trying to select the tag so I can rename it, and this will be my head peg. It's a good idea to use the -P in naming of your peg, so when you're looking at your layer stack, it's easy to determine what is part of what. Now I select the layers above that peg, drag those down, and we will see how it adds them to that peg. So now if I collapse that peg, we have a head, and looks like an ear might be, oh no, the ear is part of it. It just wasn't part of the other. So we have hair, ear front, the features, the head artwork, the back ear, and the neck in our layer arrangement. As you can see, our timeline is suddenly getting much cleaner. Where it started out with tons and tons of layers, when we start using these pegs, this is going to give us more control. Now, when I'm attaching a peg onto a head, I like to set the pivot point for it to somewhere kind of about where I imagine the head is attaching onto the neck, so that then that head can kind of, it looks like it can move with the rest of the body. It seems like it's attached properly. So if I start the head off to the side over here, he's looking up. Maybe I'm going to animate and bring his head up and rotate the facial features as I do that, so we create a nice lively animation. So I'm going to start with his head a little bit sideways here.
Don't you need to animate on?
Next steps that we need to work with here, we will be turning animate back on. We're also probably, though, going to need to set some pivot points before we get fully into the animating, just so as we adjust things, it makes it a little bit cleaner and easier to work with it. So if I look at it with the rotate tool selected, if I work my way down, the hair, well, the hair is not really, I mean, I can go give it a pivot point, but it's not like I'm going to be rotating the hair or anything, but it does feel nice not having the hair pivoting around the middle of the screen. Now when I go to the front ear and look at that, we could certainly go move its pivot point over so it lines up with that ear. I could do the back ear, same thing, lining up these pivot points. The head itself, I can put that mimicking about where I'm going to be leaving the main head peg. Doesn't really, it could come into play if, as we're doing some skewing and transforming of it a little bit later. Now if I look at the eyebrow front, I'm going to put the pivot point for the eyebrow, because I think I will be, oh wait, no, this is the front one. I will be rotating the eyebrows a little bit, so I do want that pivot point attached to the eyebrow. So remember how we can use H and J to move through our layer list. So if I move J, it's moving down. So now if I go into the eye, we can see how the front eye is set there. The back eye, that eye, I think I actually set the artwork before I handed the file off. Now I'm going to do the back brow. Cutter for the back eye. Move the back eye to the center of the eye. Eye back. The nose. Put that right around the top of the nose. Put the mouth. Middle of the mouth. And, well, neck can just go down at the bottom. Not planning to move the neck right now, so we'll leave that. If I was moving this whole person, head and neck together, then I would probably want to attach an additional peg to everything and call that my master peg. So when I have a full character, arms and legs and torso and head and neck, we usually want a master peg as a way to then control all of our artwork and all of our layers, so we can move the character with one set of keyframes. But in this case, I'm only animating the head, so that's as far as I'm going to go with that. So I've now set all of my pivot points for my different layers. I think I'm getting pretty close to feeling confident that I can start animating. To do that, I will turn on animate once more. And with that, we'll see that we need to extend out our exposure because the artwork is not going beyond frame 1. So I'll just click out at frame 60 and hit F5 on the keyboard. That extends out my artwork for my layers. Going back to frame 1. When I go to frame 1, I just want to point out one other thing. If we notice when we were working earlier and setting our pivot points and adding pegs and everything, with animate turned off, we have a certain color that shows up on screen. When I turn animate on, we will see that a different color shows up. Red, meaning it's not animating, and then we get this yellowish cast, meaning we're good to go and we can start animating. So that is something to keep in mind. Harmony will give us a visual clue if animate is turned on based on the selection coloring overlay that it uses. So I have it turned on. So the first thing I want to do is to create my starting keyframe. So I can hit F6 and that puts my beginning keyframe into my project. Now I will extend out my artwork here because I need to get into specific layers so I can move them. I want to take the, let's see, looks like I set the pivot points for the front and back eye incorrectly. Now that I have corrected which eye is connected to which, I will once again add in my keyframe. Now I'm going to go into my eye and modify the position. Animate is turned on. So now I am going to start with the eyes. In the corner. So the first step I want to do in my animation is to have my eyes roll in the head. So the next thing that I can do is move to my next position and hit F6, open it back up, and then go to the eye and to my other eye. Now I'm using the Advanced Animation Move tool. I could be doing this using the Transform tool, but I find it's easier sometimes to be isolated like this to make sure that I'm selecting the correct layer while I'm doing the animation. So that's why I'm choosing to do it in this manner. So now we can see the eyes are moving. Now I will space these keyframes out later to smooth out and slow down the animation, but I want to be able to scrub quickly through this to see that change occur. Keyframe is going to be easy to put in. I'll just hit F6, and this time I'm going to be rotating the head up on the master peg. So I've created this. Eyes are moving, the head's going to rotate up. Now it seems like it's just snapping, but what we will do is space these out and then get much smoother animation, which I can do it now and then I will undo it. So now so we can see how it, when we add in extra time, it makes it a little bit smoother. Staging your timing so you don't do everything at once will often create a more lifelike and interesting animation. But if I were to rotate or move the eyes, rotate the head, and rotate the features all in one set of keyframes, while it could be a nice smooth transition, what's going to happen is it won't be as interesting to watch compared to staging it where we're allowing the user to see one movement followed by the next, followed by the next. So now that the head has moved upright, I am going to lead with the eyes once more. So I will move to my next frame and hit F6, and this is where I want to now move. So if I click, we can see that that did choose my eye layer using the animation tool, the transform tool. And now I can move that eye over in the head a little bit. So this will work for certain things. Now I can't, with the transform tool, select that peg unless I modify the tool properties, which we can do that. So we can say choose pegs in preference to choosing drawing layer. So if I click here, it chooses the whole head peg, but I can't get down through that list, so we don't want to do that. So the head rotates up, eyes are moving. Now I'm going to move to my next frame, insert another keyframe. At this point, I'm going to start sliding the face over. Now to do this, this is where it starts getting to be a little bit individual as far as the parts that we are trying to move. Now I can cheat and see to get the beginning part by sliding over just a little bit. And now as I do that, I need to slide this ear back a little bit and this ear forward. Now as we do this, we will see how the head is starting to turn. Now as we begin this process, what we will realize is once we've turned just a tiny bit, and that can be enough to add significant visual impact into a project, just moving a few millimeters.
Oh, I see that.
And by moving the ears, it can become very convincing. Now I may need to move the hair a little bit here by stretching it just a hair and sliding it over as part of that. So we can see without any deformers, any transforms on the primary head shape. Now if you have a really unique head shape or really complicated artwork, this of course is not going to work. This works with much simpler, cleaner drawing and animation styles. So this is the start of it. Now if I move into collapse and add in my keyframe, I can open it back up once more. This time, as I grab the features, I'm going to move over more. But as I do this, I'm going to have to now start moving parts individually. Now that I've pushed it quite a bit to the edge, so we can see I've moved a lot more to the edge. This is where I'm going to now need to start pulling some parts. So I want to take the eye pieces. So I'm going to shift click those layers, and then I will move the whole eye back. Whoop, not that many layers. So I now need to pull that eye back a little bit from where it was. We can see, all right, it's getting unhappy if I try to onion skin. So I'm pulling it a little bit closer. I'm going to go grab the nose, pull the nose over a little bit behind, pull the mouth over. So I'm adjusting the overall relationship of the features of the face. Now this is also revealing to me that I may want to add in a peg to group the eye parts together so I can just grab them as one chunk.